Kind of invitation to join you today. It's wonderful to be back in Warsaw. And I think, as in the introduction, I'm very new to coins, but I'm working with some superb people. So I give my thanks to Philip and Walton, Sam Warhead, Alan McGay, and many others who are helping link my work on the metallurgy with these remarkable coin assemblages. So what I want to talk about today is introduce one key case study from a much wider project, this REMADE project that we're going to be working on for a further 6 years. And what I'm extremely interested in is not the ultimate source of the metal, but what the metal can tell us about politics and technology and people and power across the first millennium AD. And a great deal of our work is to catch up with the remarkable work that's happened and continues to happen in Poland, in Germany, France, and Spain. We're trying to create a lab in the UK that can match the wonderful chemical work that's happening elsewhere and link that data together. So, to set the scene, it's a very fractious period, the case that I'm going to talk about today. The empire is in constant tumult, as Sam Warhead describes, from the accession of Valerian in AD 253 to the death of Quintillus in AD 270. There were 20 rulers. The empire had split into the Gallic Empire and the Central Empire, constant fighting, retrenchment. Often the Central Empire was not looking towards the Gallic Empire, but towards the south and the east. It was constant fighting. This is, for numismatics, an extremely complicated period, obviously, but it's a period of great opportunity to bring together wonderful numismatic scholarship with new chemical analysis. And then within the Gallic Empire itself, there are centers of metal production, multiple mints, presumably, I think assumed at Trier and Lyon, and there's a great deal of new work that can happen to link new work on the mints, again, with the chemistry. One of the most notorious sources for this period is the famous Historia Augusta, which often is talked about as a crazy propaganda, ridiculous soap opera, but there's some very good stories in here. So I'll just, I'm sure you're very familiar with this period much more than me, to be honest, but I thought I'd just lay out who the key people in this drama are. So Gallienus, whose sole reign started in AD 260. Under his rule, the empire split into this Gallic Empire and the remaining Central Empire. And the Historia Augusta doesn't like him very much. So he's talked about he's wasting his days and nights building castles of apples, preserving grapes for 3 years, serving melons in the depths of winter, wearing the radio crown in public, sprinkling his hair with gold dust. The propaganda about this man is that he's wasteful and non-Roman and in embarrassment. We have Claudius II, whose reign starts in 268. He's written about in the complete opposite, his marvelous and admirable life. But what great quality did this man not exhibit, both at home and abroad? He loved his parents. He even loved his brothers, which is a wonder in the Roman world. He prosecutes judges guilty of theft. He has a wonderful indulgence of the stupid. He enacts these excellent laws. The complete opposite to the Gallienus propaganda. Meanwhile, in the Gallic Empire, we have Postumus, AD 260 to 269, accepted by the army. His personal power creates this breakaway polity. He performed such exploits, he completely restored the provinces of Gaul, while Gallienus was having fun with the barbarian rule. And he began, apparently, when his rule became too strict, he was assassinated. Victorinus II was assassinated for having very unhealthy hobbies of trying to have fun with the wives of his senior officers. And Tetricus apparently, according to the historian, gave up essentially and went and begged for his life to Aurelian, who then walked him in triumph through Rome dressed in trousers, the ultimate insult at that time. And but there was some kind of, through Aurelian's magnanimous nature, strict nature, there was some rapprochement, and the empire came back together. This fabulous story is obviously embellished, difficult to understand from a historical perspective, but there are some wonderful characters. How the chemistry on the surface is the complete opposite. It's tables of numbers, it's staid, it's difficult, it's mechanical. I'm very interested in how we can breathe life into this chemistry in order to at least approach what's happening in the wider social world, the technological world. And the key question that I'm asking all my colleagues and all my participants in this wider project is, how can we help? What can we actually do that is useful to archaeology, numismatics, and social theory? So alongside the coins of the propaganda, the images, the numismatics, the history of these various emperors, we also have a range of different compositions on the surface of these coins. So the mints at this time are playing with silver on the surface, they're playing with tin on the surface, sometimes the coins are unadorned, like in the top right there, all of which are covering complicated copper alloys. And then to add to the complexity, I've misspelled it here, the Barbarous Radiates are imitations of these official coins that are minted around 275, and they're locally made. These are very complicated local coinages that are either faking or imitating or copying or drawing upon these official coins. So with the dozens of emperors, the dozens of surface treatments, the dozens of power bases and splits and local coinages, this is a wonderful complex time that hopefully the chemistry can help with. So the wider project is called REMADE, Roman and Early Medieval Alloys Defined. We're trying in the UK to work across 1,000 years of history to jump things forward substantially in terms of our chemical understanding, but with proper collaboration with a wide range of heritage organizations. We are trying to create a transformative amount of data, multiple thousand analyses, hundreds of case studies, working with the national museums, working with local detectorists, local museums, every one of the units, basically the entire spread of organizations in my country to try to do something that's as useful as possible. We're working across coins, military, domestic, military, looking at religion, looking at anything that can possibly shed light on the changes in material culture through the copper alloys. We put together an extremely large team, thanks to funding through something that's ridiculously called a Future Leader Fellowship. It's a very silly name, but it lasts for 7 years. We can set up a lab, we can have multiple postdocs. So I'm currently in a very lucky position to do something quite large. We're using tiers of analysis. So we have legacy data from superb work by Peter Northover, Justine Bailey, Kath Mortimer, and others. We try to use a portable XRF on everything. There's obviously a huge debate around the quality of data from this machine. Sometimes, depending on the state of the coin, it's extremely good. Other times, it's highly corroded. So this is just our way in to understanding some of the stories. And this is our setup at the British Museum recently. The key new piece of equipment is something called a microwave plasma atomic emission spectrometer, the MP. And this produces very high quality data using small drillings or abrasions of around 10 milligrams. This is then digested in acid on a hot plate, as you can see in the bottom left. And this is extremely sensitive for a wide range of other elements that tell us something about the story of this metal. It has a nitrogen plasma that's around 5,000 degrees centigrade, and this atomizes, it turns the small amount of material in the acid into plasma, and then it reads incredibly small amounts of useful chemical elements. We're working closely with Matthew Ponting, who's done such pioneering work on silver. We're using modern charm standards to calibrate our machine and make sure that this data, even if you disagree with how I'm interpreting the data, this data can be passed to new generations and be used for other work. So, in brief, we have the surface analysis, which is non-destructive, obviously, but huge levels of corrosion. Meanwhile, we can take small abrasions from the edge of a coin, and we can slowly work our way down to incredibly small amounts of gold, cobalt, bismuth, elements that are invisible to PXRF. But by doing both together, we have the image of the surface of the coin, where, as I say, the mints are playing with silver, playing with tin, playing with how the coin appeared, and at the same time, we can look at the bulk of the coin, what that surface is covering, in order to try to understand the history of the copper alloy. So we're trying to do this in parallel. So the main case study I want to talk about for the bulk of my talk today is based around the Cunetio Hoard, which is a very famous, very large copper alloy radiate hoard that was found in central southern England. At the time, it was one of the largest coin hoards from the entire Roman Empire. I think it's been surpassed, but we're still very proud of it. We have around 55,000 coins. What we, with the collaboration with Anna Legay, Sam Moorhead in the British Museum Coin Room, we did surface analysis by PXRF of 1,500 of these coins. So the great thing about PXRF, with its flaws, at least we can analyze over 120 coins a day, 200 coins a day, and just work our way through substantial amounts of very large hoards. And what we were trying to do with this technique was capture the metal, the mint style, and as I say, try to move beyond chemistry to see the politics and the connections with the Central and Gallic empires. We want to look at the official coins compared to the barbarous coins, the Central compared to the Gallic, and the only technique that really gives us access to this level of analysis is portable XRF. What later I'm going to show you is how we can use other coins found by detectorists, metal detectorists, to link into coins that we're not going to sample in the British Museum. But then, because we can find parallels, we have permission from other finders to sample their coins and link across a wider story. So as I say, this was our setup. It's all thanks to Philippa Walton, who identified sets of 20 coins. Within the 1,500 coins, we did repeated blocks of 20 coins to try to see what individual issues were like within particular sequences, and we're thankful, obviously, to Roger Black's work. The organization and the numismatics is of such a high quality that we could very easily fit in new chemical work, and we're getting very exciting stories very quickly because we're building on such amazing numismatic work. So just this image, I just tried to show you all the data. So what we're looking at is, with PXRF, it's obviously the top surface, basically less than 0.5 millimeter of the surface of the metal. The wonderful thing for me about this hoard, that it was bought by the British Museum. It dominated their conservation department for years. They reorganized their workflow to work with this massive hoard. So therefore, the quality of the metal is extremely high. We didn't see any corrosion on these coins. They've been cleaned carefully and conserved, and we're just seeing Roman metal. It's a perfect case study for us. The bottom axis, the x-axis, is showing tin up to about 13–14%, and the y-axis, the vertical axis, is showing silver. And even just putting the raw results on a graph like this, we can begin to see areas of focus where there's repeated patterns. This was exciting. This was a great start. We could see that there are some coins that trend towards tin surfaces, some towards silver. What we did next was to place each series of coin, these blocks of 20 analyses of repeated mint production, against their mints. So in this plot, we're looking mostly at the Central Empire. Gallicanus is Roman mint. Gallienus's millennium, and then what happened after him. And the numbers on here are the series that the coins were minted in. So, for example, hopefully you can see a 1 in the center of this graph. That's the first issue of Gallienus's sole reign in the Rome mint, and it has half tin, half silver on the surface. But then hopefully you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's moving, it's being pulled across into the bottom right. The Rome mint Gallienus is losing access to silver. They're replacing that, trying to imitate that white, that silver surface with tin. And the same thing is happening in Gallienus's millennium. The M1, the first issue of Gallienus's millennium in around AD 260, is almost exclusively a thick, high-quality silver surface covering the copper alloy. Then from M1 to M3, M8, and then the blue is after Gallienus, so around 270. Again, all that silver that the Central Empire used to have access to is not being put onto the coins, and we're moving slowly across this graph towards the bottom right as tin is increasingly being used. And I was completely astonished when I saw this. The structure within Gallienus's Rome mint is changing subtly year on year over a very short time span of around AD 260 to 268. And what the mint is producing is subtly changing year on year as the metal supply changes, as the wider political environment becomes fractured and the access to silver is restrained. Gallienus is obviously still minting silver coins, but that silver is increasingly being restricted from his radio issues. And the preciseness of the numismatic was astonishing to me, where we can see individual series changing in this very predictable way and moving towards the bottom right. And then the red R's there are the Rome mint of Claudius II Victorinus. Claudius II Quintilis in the bottom right. I was amazed to see this because my previous slide was in bronze age archaeology. We never see this precision, this deliberate change in recipes in response to outside pressures. We see kind of a natural movement of metal, and the mixtures are quite generalized. This is very specific, and this is incredibly impressive. And they still have a floor below which they don't want to go, because there's still some bulk silver in their radio coinage. They maintain at least a sort of a floor standard below which they're not willing to go. Meanwhile, in the Gallic Empire, Postumus's early mint has extremely high silver on its surface. This is the PP, so Postumus's principal mint, and then we have the late collapse later. So in his initial coins, he's stabilizing his power. He wants to pay his legions. He wants to demonstrate control. These are very high quality, well, copper alloy, but really they look at silver coins. They're incredibly impressive. This cannot be sustained though. By the time the Gallic Empire is about to be reabsorbed into the Central Empire and Aurelian, when the Tetrarchy apparently just give up and go, please, we're done. By that point, there's nothing on these coins. They're completely unadorned. The first and second mints of the Tetrarchy are impossible to pull apart. There's a common flow of metal of pretty pure copper, nothing else in it, going to Trier and the Envoy, wherever the two mints really are. A complete swap in what they're presenting to the world in their coinage, which originally was incredibly high silver, is a very quick switch towards 269 when Postumus's reign is coming to an end, and then his successors can't maintain the economic heft to show off silver in the way he started. The challenge to understanding this is that the Gallic Empire contains most of the major Western silver and tin deposits. So we can understand perhaps that the Central Empire gets cut off from the lead, the tin, the silver of Britannia, the Iberian Peninsula, and the Western Alps. That may make sense, but why also does the metal from these areas not reach the Gallic peaks later on? Does that just show the level of confusion, the infrastructure is collapsing? So in a kind of straightforward way, we kind of understand the replacement, the loss of silver in the Central Empire could make some sense. Why they have the ability in Rome to then put tin on the surface when the tin is presumably, we always thought, coming from Britain, which is in the Gallic Empire. But meanwhile, the Tetrarchy have these very copper-rich, nothing else in them coins. This poses big challenges for how we understand Roman metal in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and later into the medieval centuries, because it's not straightforward. Something that is a more complex story, but it's also a clearer story than I expected. So we're seeing very deliberate decisions, very clear issues that change in stepwise ways over a very small amount of time. But it doesn't naturally fit with where we assumed the metal is coming from. So there's a great deal more work here. So there's a clear story and it makes things more complicated. So I'm just going to talk briefly now about the copies. So within the language of ancient metallurgy, we're dealing with 8 or 9 different types of alloy, depending on the levels of tin or lead or zinc in there. So with just tin, it's obviously bronze. With just zinc, it's obviously brass. But what we tend to be working with are leaded metals at this time that aid casting, and we're seeing complex mixtures that we call gunmetals, when there's both tin and zinc in the copper, and leaded gunmetals, where there's everything in there. And this isn't sufficient to understand the complexity of late 3rd century metal, because they're also deliberately adding silver in as an important economic vector into these points. But this is the palette we're starting with. So we have the Barbarous Radiate phenomenon at around AD 275, which are sometimes truly poor imitations, like the one on the screen now, sometimes incredibly good imitations of official coins. And there's a long-standing debate around what these represent. Are they faking? Are they copying? Are they imitating? What are these? It feels like within Anglophone academia right now that these are moving towards being seen as actual indicators of health in a way where there is a need for small change. There is a need for using metal as a medium of exchange in parts of the world where the official coins aren't reaching. So there's local initiative to create liquidity and exchange in markets through creating something that may not be even seen as coins. Sam Moorhead thinks of them perhaps as tokens, tokens of something that isn't directly a currency, but it's a token of wealth or status and interchangeability. So he talks of them in the same way as within the Industrial Revolution in the UK, there were a lot of tokens being minted, pellets of metal that were used by factories to pay their workers who then exchanged them in the factory shop. So there's a kind of low-level, semi-official economy because the official economy was expanding so quickly it couldn't be fed with official coins. So, but at the same time, these could be fakes. It's very interesting to see all the ways that we can interpret these very difficult coins. And by the way, you should call them coins. So, when we look at the official coins compared to the barbarous imitations of those coins, there's a slight time difference where we have the official mints and then the imitation behavior is happening around 10 years later. But the interesting thing for me is that we have this kind of signature of alloys for the official mints. So the Central Empire has a lot of leaded bronze, 75%, that top line. The imitations of those coins that in this barbarous material also is dominated by leaded bronze. Meanwhile, in the Gallic Empire, officially they're dominated mostly by copper and leaded copper, as with this surface addition of silver. but the imitations of those tend to then echo the leaded bronze and bring in these other zinc-containing alloys. So, and I realize this is complicated, I hope this makes some sense, but the main thing I want to get across is that the imitations of these different coinages themselves are different. There's a lot of regionality going on, a lot of complexity, a great deal of local copying behavior, that they're copying what they see, sometimes using the same materials, sometimes using very old materials from different previous Roman metallurgical behavior. The clearest example of this is this spike in zinc in the copied coins. So the filled-in blue circles are the zinc content of the official coins for the Central Empire, pretty much no zinc. The filled-in red circles are the level of zinc in the official Gallic Empire coins, again, very rarely, 1 or 2 out of hundreds. But there's a consistent pattern where both the Central, but really the Gallic Empire copies show these very high levels of zinc, which is absent from the official mints. And what this clearly shows is the recycling of zinc-rich previous coin, maybe sometimes going all the way back to 1st century Niestety, and the recycling of domestic metal into making these imitation local coinages. And the other thing that's going on is the deliberate use of surface tin on the copies. So again, the filled-in boxes here are official. To the right of each one are the imitations of those emperors. And there's a consistent pattern where the imitations have higher tin all across the board, because the imitation mints don't have access to silver, but they know what a radiate should look like, at least thematically. They know what they're trying to echo. And what they're trying to echo are copper-rich coins with a white surface. So they're using tin. But this is also official behavior in the Central Empire as well. So there's a very complicated negotiation going on around what a coin looks like, what metal is available. They're recycling a lot of domestic metal to make the copies, but they're also putting tin on surface where possible to change their appearance and make them look more like what the people think of as a radio. So that was all based on the Cunetio Hoard, so these 1500 PXRF quick zapping analyses of hundreds of coins to get to our 1500. We also now have access to through our network a much wider range of material that we can analyze with these drills. So we're taking small samples from other coins. And this is a very nice painting of Berkshire, and we've got concentrations of coins in this landscape that have never been studied. We don't understand. These aren't hoards now, these are just accumulations of coins from over centuries and centuries and centuries. And one of the key case studies we're looking at are from Beedon in West Berkshire. These were collected by detectorists and field walkers, and then Lindsay Bedford, that is now the owner, actually very generously has allowed us to sample all of them. So we have a long sequence of coins, 700 coins, starting with a few coins of Nero right through to the latest Roman periods in Britain. And we're aiming to analyze all of them. Why not? You know, it's easier than making a bad sampling decision. We'll just sample everything. All of these coins have now been run through this machine, which produces very, very high quality chemistry. And we're also using the PXRF on the surface, and we're looking at the bulk of these coins. And I appreciate you won't be able to read this, but all I'm trying to show here, that these are the raw results. There's structure in these copies and a great deal of diversity. So all the colors on the screen now are representing different levels of different elements in these Barbarous Radiates. The way I interpret this is by splitting our 14 elements we're analyzing for into key groups, each of which tell us something about the history of this metal. Copper is the bulk, often always over 70%. We have the major alloying elements in red on the left there, tin, lead, and zinc. We have these diagnostic elements, arsenic, antimony, silver, nickel, that tend to change in levels because of the ore source, because of the smelting, because of the recycling. We have iron, which is associated with corrosion on one side, but also the smelting temperature, and it can get absorbed into copper in complex ways. And we're also looking at these trace elements of bismuth, cobalt, manganese, chromium, and gold. And each of these sets are telling us different parts of this wider history. So I won't go into any more detail than that. It's just to say that this is the way I'm conceiving of the chemical structure. We're not putting all this data into a one-level statistical analysis. That doesn't help us. What does help us is basically to train the model about how we know as archaeologists and metallurgists about how these metals are being brought together. So we know that tin, lead, and zinc, if it's in large amounts, are deliberately there, but the structure of those will tell us something about recycling and so on. And we want to train our model based on good principles of metallurgy, rather than throw all the data into a statistical model to pull it apart. We want to train it in order to see useful archaeological structure. Anyway, that's my sales pitch. Within all these copies, we're seeing behavior that's consistent with lots of different original metals. So these are all the copies. Some of those copies were originally, we think, contemporary coins. Some of these copies look very close to the signature of the coins of Tacitus and Rhodes. A lot of these coins look like the official coins of the Central Empire. As I said, you've got these leaded bronzes with added silver. So they're using large amounts of pre-reform radiates to turn into copies because they're not getting sufficient supply of the reformed radiate, is one argument. We're seeing a lot of domestic metal, so leaded bronze that doesn't have the coinage added silver. And we're seeing lots of recycled early brass and gunmetals. We're seeing a lot of basically everything they have to have being chucked in. And we're definitely seeing the recycling of high quality early brass, possibly Cistercian coins, possibly high quality early brooches that aren't fashionable anymore. But the main thing to say is that all of this is happening in around 3 or 4 years in an obscure part of England. They're collecting local copies at a very, very high rate, and those copies are complicated and have at least 5 or 6 different lives before they get to deposition. And they're definitely keeping these things separate in some way. So if we look at the copies on the surface and compare it to the central bulk copper, we're seeing a very, very distinctive pattern where if there's silver on the surface, on the x-axis, there isn't zinc in the core. So what I'm trying to say here is that the early brass material is kept separate from the later leaded copper silver radiate material when they're making these copies. So was this by design, that they're making these copies sorting by color, separating out? They want to maximize the goldish look of the zinc when it's available to them. So that's one option. And they're definitely sorting at this period colors in glass. They're sorting in other materials to try to clarify their production. Or is this based on how the copies were produced, where there's lots of very small batches, you know, a handful of high quality, very old coins by that point, are then turned into a few dozen radiant copies? Where did they collect a few broken brooches together and then make a few copies? Did they, you know, recycle some domestic metal and turn it into something in very small batches? And each of those batches were quite distinct. Either way, this is really interesting behavior. There's lots and lots of local people wanting to create small levels of copying, and sometimes some quite sophisticated color choices. So just to finish, this is the last part of my title. We're also looking then at slightly later behavior around another split in the empire. So Carausius, according to the Central Empire, was a criminal on the run, a pirate. He was in charge of the Roman fleet in the English Channel, and then basically stole it and used that to create a power base where he declared himself Emperor of Britannia. And his coins are wonderful. Samuel has done remarkable work on the new ROC volume of Carausius and the Leptus, and some of these coins are hilarious. So the Central Empire are desperate to kill him, and he's minting coins like this, where he's saying, my brothers, we're all brothers together, this is legitimate power, you know, the peace that we've brought to the empire, when they're desperate to assassinate him, basically. And when they finally, by some mechanisms, do get rid of him, and Electus, his successor, is also killed, there's a consistent power proclamation of the Britons were so relieved to be, you know, away from the subjugation of these pirates, and venerated Constantius Chlorus, and everyone's happy. The interesting thing is that the chemistry of these coins doesn't show this. They don't show a pirate on the run, you know, just who saw the opportunity to grab power and you know, and just held on to Britain for a few years through sort of through military piracy. What the coins show is that the Britannic Empire is completely consistent with what's going on in the wider world. So on the left here is just, again, I know you won't be able to see the detail, but just the color sequence for the mints in the Central Empire and in the East are very consistent. It's back to this leaded bronze with deliberate added silver. That's what that shows. When we start to look at the coins and crowns of Electus, we see the exact same alloy profile. We see leaded bronze with the deliberate addition of silver. And this again is very interesting to us. This completely surprised us. We assumed that this could be a rebellious breakaway region under threat. Would they have trouble maintaining the currency supply? Would the economy be collapsing? Instead, what we see are the coins projecting erudite Latin phrasing, confidence, power, centrality, and they're doing that in the actual metal as well. That they're backing up their propaganda by saying we're official, we're real, and the coins themselves have the true Roman radiates composition of deliberately adding silver into their radiates, and there's economic stability, and they're able in the London Mint and in this mobile sea mint to basically be consistent with the wider world of Roman coinage, which was amazing. And how are they doing this? And who knew? So when they put the XXI mark on these coins to say that 1 part in 20 is silver, but they're actually doing that. Who knew about what that mechanism means? What small group of people realized that kilos and kilos of silver are being put into Krause's official copper alloy radiates in order to maintain that consistency with what went before, and also with his contemporary brother emperors. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope what this shows is that we're trying to collaborate sincerely across as many different areas of numismatic and small find and archaeological research as possible. And we're trying to have an archaeological way of looking at metal chemistry, which, as I say, is trying to look at process and trying to look at the history of the metal. We've got approaches to the results that allow us to see these echoes of past behavior and recycling and contact, which sometimes go with the political story, sometimes go against the political story, but hopefully add something to a wider debate. The core of my work over the next few years is to add as much data as possible to this, and we're going to try to make that publicly available as early as possible to keep seeding new collaborations, new conversations. But thank you very much to all the dozens of people who have helped me and have done such amazing work. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Thank you indeed. So now we have some discussion. I just close. Okay. So just okay. So if any question from the audience or from all our online participants.
Thank you for a really interesting presentation, and I'm really enthusiastic because I managed to understand this. It's really good. So I just want about two things. One is this the composition of leaves, which is sometimes on a really high level. Is it possible that they just use the leaves to make the coins heavier, maybe, or something like that? And the other thing is who could produce these barbarous versions of coin? You mean that there could be some individuals who are, getting extra money from it, or then you could just bring your old money or some other metal objects to recast them and to restock them. So that's
Thank you very much. Two excellent questions. So I think to discuss lead briefly, I think the copied coins are generally lighter by about a gram or gram and a half, and this wouldn't really be noticeable. But they are much smaller, and I think the difference is made up by added lead. And I think the thing, particularly in Britain, lead is in huge supply because of the lead mines, the silver production. It's hugely available. If we look at the wider span of metal composition over hundreds of years, the one major pattern is the constant accumulation of lead in the UK supply. Because I think you're right, I think it adds weight, it adds heft, it gives some creation of value because of how people see it. What it also does is make it easier to strike, it makes it easier to melt, it makes it more convenient to make these copies. It does make it easier. So pure copper melts at 1084 degrees centigrade, extremely high. It's very hard to work, very hard to use. So the addition of lead makes all this copying easier. It's something else. So it's weight and easiness, convenience, and it's there, and it's available, and it's cheap. So it all kind of comes together. The other question about who is doing this is the core question we want to really look at. So sometimes when you looked at the Cunetio Hoard, I saw a coin that looked as good as anything I've ever seen. And I go to my to Philip Walton, my colleague, and say, why was this called a barbarous copy? And she said, well, if you look closely, the hair is slightly wrong. I was like, okay. But then when we analysed it, obviously they're completely right. It's a different alloy, it is a copy. But to me, it's impossible to tell. I mean, and at the same time, sometimes they're awful. They just look like matchstick men with silly stick hair, and that's supposedly the radiocraft. So I think, to answer your question, a lot of the copies are happening in a previously official mint, I think. And then it goes all the way down into real local production, not in desperation, but trying to make value, trying to create some way of having a cash economy completely outside the official. So I think it's a complete continuum across.
And if I have any testimonials?
Yeah.
Just like the way of the testimonials, not written.
Yeah, so we're beginning to look at coin molds, and we're looking at other things like fel temperato coins. So the interesting thing in Britain, and I assume many other places, is this long sequence of two coinages: the official, and then we have the Claudian copies, Coins and British Association, fel temperato, Barbarous copies. There's always parallel series of complicated things going on, and hopefully the metal can help, the metallurgy can help. But the reason we're doing this is because we have a PhD student associated with the wider project, and we're very lucky, this was a free PhD. We could choose the topic and then find someone to do it. And we basically chose the hardest thing we could think of. But Tash Bulbrook is an ex-Portable Antiquities team professional numismatist, small price specialist. So we've given her the hardest possible topic, which is to understand this behavior. So hopefully she won't leave the project, but all of these questions are at the core of what we're trying to do.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Because the third century is also the period when especially metal vessels were also found to pretend to be silver probably. And do you did any comparable research on the analysis on the vessels to see if there was, because like from the period of C2, as we call it on Barbarian Europe, yes, it's always said, so it's said in the last quarter of the century. It's always said in the report that the vessel was killed, yes, without details of analysis, and they usually all finds. And it would be interesting to see if, because I presume that even now, if you have silver or tin surface, you cannot recognize it by the view, you have to analyze it. Yes, yes. Is it correct?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is an excellent suggestion. So I know James Gerrard in Newcastle is starting to analyze vessels, and we're hoping to work with him. And
also the same pattern was considered approach in the vessel industry.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That's an excellent point. Yes, and we're definitely hoping to look across every category of object. So we're absolutely, this is a great suggestion to see whether the parallels in these other vessels, in the vessels, in the brooches, in the buckles, in the lamps, in everything. So your point about, is it easy to identify by eye what's silver and what's tin? It's very, very difficult. So we have a PhD student working in the British Museum on statuettes, on small figurative statuettes, and in the Victorian, in the 1800s record, they say, oh, this is a silver statuette, and then she analyzes and there's tin. And sometimes it's the opposite. She's seeing silver where it's been missed before. So it's surprisingly hard to tell apart. So, and I think there will be a lot of very useful discussion around different object types. So the one thing we have done, which is not vessels yet, but is earlier, the Claudian copies and the Claudian official and the military brooches, the Orchissa sequence brooches, are all identical in their metal composition, because they're very high quality brass. They're all coming from central Italy, they're all very official. So even the copies are being made out of metal that's very restricted, and they look very similar to the dress ornaments and the small ones. And this has been missed before because too many specialists working on different things. If we can bring the communication and health the network, I'm sure we'll see lots of connections. Thank you.
Any questions from our online participants? See just Alec, many thanks, really interesting. Sorry about it. We leave now. If not, I have two less smart questions than from my colleagues. Probably it's just technical questions. First of all, my question is about comparability of your analysis. Do you plan make your investigation, your research just on your own analysis, or you also will be another from another methods from X, and is it possible to compare with your method?
Yes, thank you. It's crucial for us to be able to compare across. Mm-hmm. So okay, so there's two main things to say. First is that we use industry recognized standards like the charm set of metals, which were designed by archaeometallurgists to be similar to ancient alloys, but they're certified reference materials that are of the highest quality, and we can all individually analyze these to make sure that our data is of the best quality. So it's crucial that we all share our standards data so that we know how things work together. So with PXOF, we can reproduce these high quality standards by repeated analysis of the known high quality metal, and then we can have correction factors. So some people don't do this, but it's very straightforward, and we can have high quality. The other important thing to say is that the coins, again, are very useful for this work, because the official mints are very consistent. Therefore, the first thing we did was to use our new MP machine on coins that have been analysed by Boston, by Berlin, by Frankfurt, by others, and we're getting very, very consistent results across. So they're not standard, but because we know in great detail the coinage from Nero and its composition, we can make sure that we're getting results that talk to each other. And finally, it's crucial for us to use the results of anyone, anywhere, because some of these analyses will never have access again. They're on amazing material that is lost, or will never sample again. So a lot of the statistical approaches I use are quite generalized, or they're designed to allow us to get them to talk to each other. Because if you throw some of these old data into a statistical package, it will just pull apart projects. Or pull apart
Old data is better.
Oh yeah, so the approach I want to old data is to maximize how it can talk to each other. To make sure, so a lot of my previous research was using data from 60, 70, 80 years ago on machines without using it anymore, but making sure that they could communicate with the data from the machines. So just cast the biggest net possible. I'm a prehistorian, really, as you probably can tell from the mistakes I made with the coin discussion. But the ability to then take Bronze Age data, Iron Age data, Roman data, right through to modern, gives us a much better understanding of each individual period, I think. So again, it's crucial that we work as collaboratively as possible.
And thank you. And then my next question, I don't know if it's true, but taking into account some changes what occur in the metal with the time.
Yeah.
Because I'm always wondering how many of these changes in the coin metal.
Yeah.
And how it's important.
Sure. Yeah. So what we assume is that the relative chemistry of how these different metals behave into the corrosion product, we assume it's relatively predictable. That the tin is very mobile into corrosion, so we see higher levels of tin, we see lower levels of zinc in the corrosion. I actually think it's very hard to pin that down. There's so many variables at the time, the variable conditions, and also a lot of previous projects that were using archaeological objects to compare the corrosion to the bulk. They didn't take into account surface treatments that there would have been a little tin. So the tin sometimes is extremely hard. How much of that's corrosion, how much of that is old surface treatment? It's hard to put apart. So even at 2000 BC, there's a lot of axes that have deliberate tin surfaces. So it's always been there as a problem. So even when you see people doing surface analysis and bulk analysis and showing change, how much of that is old technology? How much of that is systematic change in the variable? It's hard.
I also, it's a big discussion now for the possibilities of dating, metal dating.
Yeah.
And when it was, when this specimen was cast, or when, because it's very, very important. I said, I think it's a good, one of the steps, small steps.
I think we can clearly show in most archaeological periods at least some examples of very old metal being used, at least occasionally. And the best way to explain some of these barbarous copies, as soon as you sample them, which I know we're very lucky to be able to sample them, the colour is amazing. Below that, so some of these coins have been thrown away in the UK. There's no resale value, there's no collection. People see them as grotty, bad coins and they're thrown away. But as soon as if we can sample them, we can see these amazing stories, and the colour below the corrosion is fantastic. And some of that metal must be 150 years old. Yeah, because that's the only previous time there was this pure brass. And if you think about how, so within the UK, there's been 1 million Roman coins recorded over the last 10 years. And so the amount of stuff that may have been available in the past for recycling must have been quite high.
Okay, thank you very much. And any question? Any question? No? Thank you very much again.